The White House escalating the federal response to unrest, and local lawmakers are throwing a hissy fit. God forbid that the President of the United States try to protect the law-abiding citizens of California. California's Attorney General is suing the Trump administration for deploying the National Guard.
Streets were mostly quiet and calm. Since Trump announced his plan to deploy troops, the situation on the ground has escalated quickly, with unrest growing overnight, causing highways to close and putting people in danger. As a result, I, in partnership with Governor Gavin Newsom, are suing President Trump and asking the court to set aside the president's unlawful action federalizing the California National Guard.
Jonathan Hoenig, you being the
yes,
libertarian that you are, this is absurd that they're suing. Again, they're not worried about the violence. The Attorney General in California or Gavin Newsom, they're trying to make this a political spectacle.
Well, and thank you for calling it violence. I'm so sick of people assaulting police officers, destroying property, blocking traffic, setting up fireworks in the middle of the street, calling that protest. That's not. That's violence. And Dagan, to your point, that's exactly what government is supposed to protect us from, is that violence. So people who want to peaceably protest, that's one thing, but that's not what we're seeing coming out of California. I have to say, I do worry a bit about the militarization of law enforcement. In effect, I think it looks really bad for the president to have Marines facing down against U.S. citizens. So
that's not why
there's an image issue here that I think the president might lose at.
But that's not what the Marines are there doing. The Marines are there only to protect federal property and federal officers. They're not they're not there in a law enforcement role at all. So federal buildings, for example. And I will note that it's quite one of the things, because Jonathan Hunt was talking about this yesterday on Friday, and anybody can jump in here, that he thought it was odd that the LAPD was so slow to act on Friday night. Well, it's because, based on reports, and even Mark Wayne Mullen, the senator, said this yesterday, he had been briefed that Karen Bass, the mayor, told the LAPD to stand down.
Can I jump in on this?
Yeah, because again, federal, immigration.
Right.
We're going to be on the side of illegal migrants rather than on the side of people who are enforcing the laws of the land. So the Democrats' side, rather than law and order, it is lawlessness and disorder. President Trump in the Oval Office taking questions largely focused on the Los Angeles riots and his response to those riots, sending in National Guard troops and also several hundred Marines just yesterday. Jackie, I interrupted you to go to the president, and I will not be a ball hog, but the president did say that all I want is safety when asked about the Marines. When will they leave, meaning the National Guard and the Marines? They will be there until there is no danger. You are looking at paid insurrectionists. You could call this an insurrection. And he went into 2020 where it was very obvious he was not going to sit back and allow to happen in Los Angeles what he watched happen in Minnesota, then governed by former vice presidential candidate Tim Walz.
Yeah, and that was a great recap. I have a lot of points that I want to make because he touched on how the agitators were breaking the concrete to use that as weapons. I was looking at those images earlier today, and they were really staggering. When you see the kind of violence that they were trying to incite, you realize that you've got to take these people off the street, and that is why the president wanted to send in force. Now, you were talking before we went to the president about the police response in Los Angeles. Of course, they're going to be told to back off and not to be aggressive. And therefore, the president had to make the decision to send the National Guard and the Marines in there. The attorney general is making this a chicken or egg issue. He's saying it didn't get violent until the president said he was going to send in the National Guard. That is what everybody got up in arms about. I don't think so. Also, there's a huge contagion issue here, and he touched on that as well. This is an example to everybody else across the country, all the blue states and their governors that allow this kind of thing to happen, that if you do this, this is the level of force you're going to be met with. It was Sarah Sanders, Governor Sanders of Arkansas, who's on earlier today, and she was asked, what would you do if the president sent the National Guard into your state if you were dealing with an issue like this? And she said, I wouldn't be dealing with an issue like this in my state. That's because the view is entirely different. And what I think is happening when you think about how organized this is with the agitators is it's meant to move and be contagious and cause disruption all over the country. And I think the president learned his lesson watching what unfolded in Minnesota in 2020, saying, this is the kind of thing that in my second term, we're going to tamp it down, and we're going to tamp it down quickly to give everybody the message that this is not going to fly in America. And I go back to the point that I made yesterday, which is 76 million people voted for law and order in this country because they have had enough.
And the law stands behind President Trump. He has the authority under Section 12406 of Title 10 of the U.S. Code to deploy the National Guard if the president is, quote, unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. And there's even a Berkeley law dean who is admitting that President Trump likely has the legal authority to do this.
A Berkeley law dean.
That would be the University
wild.
of California.
Yes.
And I mean, certainly in those comments, he succeeded in portraying Governor Newsom as having failed to keep, Jackie, to your point, law and order. I mean, there's a lot of politics running through this, obviously. And look, the role of government is to keep us safe. So I don't know if Los Angeles would be burning necessarily as the president says it would be, but Gavin Newsom certainly failed in recent nights when it comes to actually keeping Los Angeles safe and free.
Would Newsom and Bass have allowed the insurrectionists, the violent protesters, to injure and even potentially kill ICE agents? That's the issue.
And you know what I really love is President Trump didn't want to wait and find out. What we just saw there, in my view, is a masterclass. He knew exactly what was going on the ground. He said, I've been in this situation before, and I learned my lesson, and I'm not going to let it happen again like we saw in 2020. That is absolutely brilliant. He knows why he's sending the National Guard in. He knows why he's sending the Marines in. He knows the law on this. The law is on his side in this. And the best message he delivered, and you touched on this, Jackie, he said, you do this anywhere else. You do it at the parade this coming weekend. You do it anywhere else in America. You're going to be met with equal or greater force. That is called deterrence with the law on your side. This is the leadership we lacked for 4 years, and it's what we didn't see in 2020, and we're seeing it now, and the results are going to be better. It might be a tough slog, but you've got somebody who knows what they're doing at the helm.
And I kept wondering, why does this make me so angry, right? Like everything that's being fanned in flames on social media. And I think because it hits a sore point that even though most of our audience, and none of us live in LA, most of our audience, none of us live in Minneapolis, this is still the microcosm of what hits hard at home, where I remember that Memorial Day in 2020, when I was told you were not allowed to go to church, you were not allowed to run in the park, you were not allowed to go meet your friends for a picnic, but you are allowed to burn down the streets. And that hypocrisy, I think, is what angers so many people. Even though I don't live in LA, I don't live in Minneapolis, and I could argue this has nothing to do with me, it does. Because the people, Jackie, to your point, 77 million people finally said, I'm awake. I'm done with the hypocrisy. It is not rules for thee, but not for me anymore. If you can riot and burn the city, then I'm damn well going to go to church, and you're not going to tell me otherwise. And yes, I want you to stop burning my city. I loved what Kristi Noem had to say when she said, this is just moms who want to walk down the street and take their kids to school. Stop. I don't want to see the burning of the police cars. I don't want to see bricks being thrown in. We voted for law and order because this stuff cannot fly anymore. I want a normal, civilized society when we can walk to school and I do not have to worry about the rioting.
They don't. It goes back to the left and the Democrats do not stand up for law-abiding legal residents of the United States.
Yes.
They just don't. So going back to the COVID era, Gavin Newsom did call in the National Guard to help with COVID testing.
Right.
Yep.
In January of 2022, when the pandemic was over. That's when he called in the National Guard. And Nancy Pelosi put out a statement later yesterday and blamed Trump, essentially. Trump made those marauders set those cars on fire. If there's anybody to blame, it's the Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries and Tim Walz for making ICE agents targets.
Yeah.
And let me just quote old Tampon Tim. This is at the University of Minnesota Law School commencement address,
right,
where he said Donald Trump's modern-day Gestapo is scooping folks up off the streets. He called ICE agents Gestapo.
Yep.
So if there's anybody to blame for putting a target on the backs of federal law enforcement, it's Tim Walz.
No.
And it's an abomination.
I agree with you 100% on that, and that's how it all starts. But they want the chaos because the chaos helps them with their agenda. They don't want President Trump to succeed with his deportation plans. They wanted the border to be open so 20 million people could come here and cause chaos. The more chaos there is, the more power and control that they have, because then they come and say, look, we're going to help you. Look, we're going to fix it. But they're not going to fix it the right way. And so it's this like really perverse logic that keeps cycling through our culture. And let me just say one more thing. They're putting that target on the back of the ICE agents, but what Pam Bondi is also saying to these agitators is, we know who you are. We are going to pick you up and we are going to put you in jail. They never did that in 2020. And the more you do that, because this is so organized, the more we have an ability to control it, to make sure that it doesn't happen again and to be able to prevent it. But they want this. That's why they allow it.
They're suing to allow it to keep happening. Like, the only two things that the Attorney General and the Governor of California have done is filed lawsuits. Like, that's their answer to chaos and disruption, is to go to court and sue Trump. It is a one-trick pony that three legs are cut out of it, and it's dragging itself along, and America should just abandon it because it cannot get the job done.
Brian, I think you said it best when you said deterrence. That's my hope. Look, it could be a really long, hot summer if we see, and I live in downtown Chicago, if we see outbursts like this start to spark up once again, like we saw in the Summer of Love or on the George Floyd era, etc. I mean, you could see massive property destruction and death. So you need some level of deterrence. If President Trump can accomplish that, my hat's off to him. Yeah.
But the reason it went on is because there was no deterrence.
Right.
There was no pushback. They let it happen.
What government is supposed to do is to keep people's property and people's persons themselves safe. And Democrats have dropped the ball.
Even a libertarian will agree there's one role for government, and it's protecting the citizens and the people who live in the United States legally.
We've got libertarians, Berkeley law deans, and everyone else in America all agreeing on this point.
Jonathan, great to see you as always.
Great
Thanks, man.
Thank you.